space for us.
Un espacio para nosotras.
Un espace pour nous.
Hello to you and welcome to the Forest Storytelling Initiative, A Space for Us, and to our special episodes as part of the 5th edition of the annual March With Us campaign, where we're celebrating the stories of those at the forefront of gender justice, equality, and rights. For 2025, our theme is Reimagining Power. I am your host, Clarice, and in today's episode, we are honored to be joined by Ben Donaldson and Enise Timori. They're here to talk about the 1 for 8 billion campaign of movement to ensure the appointment process for the next United Nations Secretary General is fair, open, inclusive, and reflective of the future we need most especially. Ben and Enise, thank you so much for joining us and for leading this incredible campaign.
Thank you so much for having us on. We're really excited.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for honoring our invitation. So let's jump right in. The next Secretary General will be appointed in 2026, a decision that will shape how the United Nations addresses global challenges for the world's 8 billion people. Ben, I begin with you. Can you tell us more about why this campaign is so important and how it aims to create a fairer, more inclusive process for selecting the next Secretary General?
Thanks, Clarice. At the heart of this campaign is the idea of fairness, of inclusivity, and why do we need this? Why do we need this so badly right now? Well, a fair process is going to lead to a leader who is more legitimate, who has more credibility, and has more power in order to drive forward the work of the UN, the crucial work on climate change, on pandemics, on addressing inequality, all of the work that I think everyone who works in the multilateral system and believes in multilateralism wants to see the UN address. Now, the UN, the UN's a tough place to work, and it doesn't have limitless resources, and it doesn't have the ability to just make things happen. So the UNSG, the UN Secretary General, we need at this particular moment, perhaps more than ever, we need someone who can just squeeze every last bit of normative power out of that UN system in order to try and drive forward those agendas that I just mentioned. And so, why does it matter so much who's in charge of the UN? This is the question that the campaign tries to get to the heart of, where anyone who's ever had a bad boss knows that leadership matters. I spoke to a senior UN official just the other week who was talking, it was just in the wake of Trump's appointment. And she was saying that, under the tenure of the next UN leader who will take office on the 1st of January 2027, the UN could become an unrecognizable place if that person isn't able to fly the flag for multilateralism and fly the flag for sort of countries working together and provide that counterpoint to some of the very, very isolationist and sort of nationalist movements that we've seen emerging. So this is why we need to get it right this time, and we need it to happen through a fair process, a process that the public's going to believe in, and a process that all of the countries at the UN are going to have some faith in. And so it's precisely because of Trump and geopolitics that we need someone trusted who can mediate. Geopolitics is definitely back in a huge way. And, we need someone that we can turn to, an honest broker, if you like, who can provide that that higher level of sort of morality and higher level of sort of intent in order to sort of mediate between countries. I mean, we can all remember what happened in previous moments with the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example. It was UTANT who had to mediate between the US and the Soviets in order to shuttle between them and de-escalate that issue. Kofi Annan, he stood up to Bush and Blair over the Iraq War, and that meant a huge deal to people around the world. It really changed how the global public saw that intervention. And of course, other SGs like Hammarskjöld played a huge role in in establishing UN peacekeeping. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is SGs really can make a difference. This person really can, if they use their sort of office well, they can make a huge difference. And I don't think we can afford anything other than the appointment of a sort of transformative woman leader.
Thank you so much for explaining that, Ben. It makes a whole lot of sense. And I'll turn to you, Enise. The campaign advocates for appointing the first ever woman Secretary General in the UN's 80-year history. That is huge. Why is this such a critical step? And how can it reshape the United Nations role in advancing gender equality around the world?
Well, I mean, you said it there really. Simply put, it's critical because it's very long overdue. Kind of 80 years of unbroken male monopoly of leading the UN. It's time for that to end. It's time for that historic injustice to be addressed. But more importantly, it's the organization that sets the standards and expectations for the world. And it cannot lead us into a future of gender equality until it has its own house in order. As Ben said, it's also still critical because the world needs the UN, the world needs a strong UN Secretary General. And I think it's time that the best woman leader is found to run it, to address the interconnected global crises that we're facing, of which we know that inequalities, growing inequalities, and not least backsliding on women's rights is really a critical factor. And more than that, speaking to something Ben also mentioned, what's quite clear is it's critical because the time is now. You know, there is a growing chorus among states, among civil society, that this is the opportunity for this transformational change that the organization, multilateralism, the world really needs. In 2024, we saw states, around 80 states in the General Assembly, demanding better representation of women in multilateralism. 27 states that make up the Accountability, Coherency and Transparency Coalition went further and said, we cannot miss the transformative opportunity to appoint the UN's first woman Secretary General. And of course, the Pact for the Future incorporated language from previous General Assembly resolutions encouraging states to put forward women candidates. These UN member states have also joined influential voices like the group of women leaders, the elders, in acknowledging that the appointment of a woman Secretary General is really a moral imperative in upholding our commitments to gender equality. As I said, it's really time that we address this historical injustice, but it's also about the future. It's really about the future of the organization and facing the threats that we collectively need to address. And we know the UN's normative power is waning. We know its ability to advance gender equality is being hampered by a crisis in confidence in its effectiveness. And so states, campaigners, I think they really recognize that this is an opportunity to reshape and recalibrate the UN, ensure it's more accountable, transparent to the people it serves. It's an opportunity to restore credibility in UN and multilateralism and stem the tide of retreat and isolationism that Ben mentioned. And it's also an opportunity to revitalize the vision of the organization to meet the challenges of the present and future. Helen Clark joined us in September when we launched our policy platform. She was a former candidate in 2016, of course, a former Prime Minister of New Zealand. And she told our audience on the sidelines of UNGA that appointing a feminist woman leader would be part of revitalizing the UN and could bring a different touch to the way the UN can lead on some of the biggest and very challenging issues. We know there's no shortages of challenges, but there can no longer be any more excuses. And I think we agree that it's time for a new approach. And there's really no shortage of exceptional women leaders out there. And it's time for one of them to take the helm at the UN.
Super inspiring, Enise, and this falls in line with our theme for this year, reimagining powers. And reimagining powers also, in fact, includes making sure that there is finally the gender equality that the world has been clamoring for all these decades. And on to the next question now. The policy platform outlines key recommendations for the selection process. Ben, could you walk us through some of these policies? I'm talking about things like improving transparency, promoting diversity, and ensuring fair representation. How can these changes create a level playing field for candidates from around the world?
That's a great question. Thank you, Clarice. So the approach of the campaign is right now we are in process mode because we are at the phase of the campaign where the official race hasn't begun. We don't have candidates yet. We're expecting that phase to begin later this year, probably November or December. So right now we're trying to get the process right. And so we want to see a fair and inclusive and transparent race. So we're in preparation mode. So if you actually, when you drill down into the sorts of things that we believe will help make that race more fair and more inclusive, we're looking at scrutiny, in particular scrutiny of the sort of backroom deals that are going on. We want more transparency. We want to find out how the top jobs are going to be carved up at the United Nations. And you're talking about, I think, reimagining power and sort of spreading power around the world. This is the key part of our policy platform. So we want to put policies in place that make it much harder for candidates to be put under pressure and undue pressure from particularly the powerful states in order to give out the top jobs to those countries. Like you can probably, you can look at the organogram at the top of the UN. Anyone can just sort of load this up on the UN sort of webpage, and you can see that political jobs tend to go to Americans. You can see that the French get peacekeeping time and time again. You can see that the Russians have had a monopoly on the Office of Counterterrorism since it was created. And these are the sorts of ways that I think we can, coming back to your reimagining power, it's actually far beyond representation of the top of the UN. It's representation at the entire sort of UN cabinet level, which is very, very much associated with this SG selection process. These jobs get promised and get and candidates get scrutinized way before they take office. These are the sorts of things that we're on the lookout for, and we're going to be building this movement right now in order to be poised, ready to scrutinize what's happening and putting things into the public domain and sort of really sort of having a razor sharp focus on the ways in which candidates can become compromised along the way, which actually really stands against candidates being able to sort of project to have integrity and to project that sort of that moral sort of conscience that you kind of want the UN's leader to be able to project. There are some nuts and bolts that we're going for in terms of some ways we're trying to actually change the rules of the game before the next race happens. The General Assembly right now is considering how best to run this process. So, for example, we want an assurance that all candidates are gonna disclose their finances, where they're getting their money for their sort of race. We want to see the General Assembly insist that the Security Council gives them more than one candidate to choose from. Right now, they just get one candidate and they have to rubber stamp him. It's always been a him so far. They just have to rubber stamp the person that they're sort of foisted upon by the Security Council. We want to work with the General Assembly, and I know there's a lot of interest in the General Assembly on this issue, to demand a shortlist to actually make a democratic choice on who the next SG should be. Maybe an all-women shortlist is what we're specifically calling for, but they've never been given the choice of a single woman, let alone an all-women shortlist. So this is another sort of key policy that we're putting forwards. We also want to see improved hearings, like more interactions with candidates. So there's ways that we can prepare for this. At the moment, each candidate will get one hearing in the General Assembly. That's the sort of norm that has been established over the last two sessions, over the last two selection processes, when since then there was nothing. But over the last two selection processes, each candidate gets one kind of bite at the cherry and will get, I think it's a 2 or maybe a 3-hour hearing in front of the General Assembly. We'd like official hearings with civil society. We'd like public hearings, town halls, this kind of thing, regional meetings, so that and to take it out of New York. So we'd like to see much more engagement with candidates in order to, and this sort of thing has to be prepared ahead of time in order to get them on record, in order to be able to hold them to account better. And actually, it's in their favor in some ways, because we talked about normative power, and like they need to be working with the public, with parliaments, with civil society, and actually work. And this comes back to the sort of concept of reimagining power. The way I see it is that the SG is going to have to work with a much wider set of actors than they have done in the past in order to push forward the UN's mission. The Security Council is kind of broken right now, and we need the UN leader to be able to connect far more broadly with the general public, with civil society, in order to continue to push things forwards. Kind of a way of getting around the blockages that we see, as well as working more closely with the General Assembly, which is why if you check out our policy platform on 148billion.org, you will see that all of our policies are described in terms of power dynamics, and actually trying to shift power away from the Security Council and provide sort of mechanisms for the General Assembly to be able to assert itself more, where every country has one voice, one vote.
Wow, I've been nodding because this is super, super inspiring. And this is really your initiative, your organization trying to shift the power. To you listening, if you are just joining us, we are speaking with Ben Donaldson and Enise Timori from the 148 Billion campaign. And we are talking about reimagining powers for this year's March With Us campaign. I'm going to turn to you now, Enise. One of the campaign's goals is to challenge systemic and structural barriers within international institutions. How does the 148 Billion campaign aim to address these challenges? And what role do member states, civil society organizations, and individuals play in breaking these barriers?
Well, the thing is, working with someone like Ben, the issue is he has such thorough responses. He inevitably covers so much ground that many of the things that I'd hoped to say is very, very comprehensively spoken about. But I think that I can just add to some of the things that he's already mentioned, which are really critical when we talk about kind of systemic and structural barriers. One of them, obviously, is this kind of core power imbalance that is built into the structure of the United Nations, and that is the power that the permanent 5 members of the Security Council hold. And we know that when it comes to appointments, when it comes to the Secretary General selection process, these permanent members of the Security Council have too long held too much sway when it comes to how these decisions are taken. And that is often, in the case of other senior appointments in the UN system, that is often despite countless General Assembly resolutions calling for merit-based appointments, calling for the end of state monopolies on senior roles. And what we know is that not only is this a barrier to immensely talented candidates having a chance at these opportunities, but it also fuels a resentment. I think Ben's mentioned some of the dynamics in the Security Council, the dynamics between the Security Council and the wider General Assembly. There is, growing resentment at the permanent 5 domination of the international system, kind of more generally, but especially when it comes to some of these kind of the access to decision making and to defining what the working methods of the UN are going to be. And that we know that despite improvements, despite commitments to accountability and transparency, despite the fact that many members of the General Assembly get up and agree on resolutions to kind of be more accountable, be more transparent, we know that too often the majority of states, the majority of the global, the so-called global majority and civil society are cut out from decision making, are cut out from the rooms where their voices need to be heard. And our colleagues, so one of the steering committee members of 148 Billion is an organization called Plataforma CIPO. And in 2024, they produced some groundbreaking research that demonstrated that despite recent progress on diversity and inclusion and equity, a lot of which has been supported by the UN Secretary General, there remains a concerning lack of racial diversity in UN senior leadership positions. We also have seen that research from the group of women leaders, GWL Voices, shows that of 54 multilateral organizations, 21 have never had a woman in charge. And that includes the International Labour Organization and all the development banks. And 15 of these multilateral organizations have only ever had one woman leader. And then another steering committee member of 148 Billion is Civicus. Their latest data shows us that 70% of the world's population lives in countries where civic space is either highly restricted or completely closed. And so what we know and what we see from these barriers is that reforming appointment processes, of course, especially the Secretary General selection process, is vital to redressing power imbalances, as we've already spoken about. But that also civil society involvement is vital, not only to ensure a robust process, but to widen access and participation and to kind of counter this movement to silence and to hinder the voices of those who really have the solutions to so many of the challenges that we are facing. And so I might actually just quickly speak a little bit about some of the progress the campaign, the first iteration of this campaign made, because it really shows and demonstrates the role that member states, that civil society, that individuals can play, and kind of how we hope to build on that. Because in 2015, the campaign then was called One for 7 billion. There were 7 billion people in the world at that time. We weren't able to win on every front. Civil society's formal participation was still too tokenistic. And of course, that glass ceiling of appointing a woman leader was not broken. But there were other areas where the campaign was able to make progress, a significant process, and it did that through working with member states to bring the selection process out of the shadows, to have public dialogues with candidates, to scrutinize their records, to engage journalists, to engage civil society, to challenge the records and the vision statements of candidates, and also to make sure that the wider UN membership was more involved. And this undoubtedly put and exerted pressure on those powerful states that Ben has already mentioned and we've already discussed. And I think that really we just want to build on those reforms. The reforms of 10 years ago need to be the baseline. We need to aim for more. And Ben's already mentioned the policy platform and some of the really specific ways that we want to do that. But I'll just say here that, look, member states can and should only nominate women candidates. That is really simple. And you know what? If the Security Council presents the General Assembly with a list of only male nominees or just a male nominee, the General Assembly has the power to reject that nomination. And we've seen this is something that certain states are already talking about and discussing. And we really, really want to support them in kind of creating that coalition of support to have the agency that is enshrined to them in that system. And then, of course, civil society can and join the movement for a Women's Secretary General, join us, join the campaigns as we try to make this progress, demand that their representatives only consider women candidates, and be prepared to participate in scrutinizing vision statements and holding candidates and states to account, as Ben has already mentioned. And really crucially, individuals can and should lobby their elected representatives to support a robust election process. They need to remind them that in the face of shared challenges, global action is necessary. The next SG has a vital role to play. And we can, if we select the right feminist woman leader, we can have a leader that works towards our shared safety and prosperity.
Wow, I just don't know how to tell you how in awe I am that you have all these amazing ideas that need all the support. It needs to get all the support it can get from everyone in the world. We should all be feminists. I want to say that. And we are gradually moving towards the end of our interview. But before we part ways, Ben, looking ahead, what would you say is the long-term vision for the United Nations if these recommendations that you've both mentioned are implemented? What kind of change do you hope that the 148 Billion campaign will inspire, both within the UN and also for global governance?
Yeah, so building on what Anise has just said about this, you know, we want to see the appointment of not just the first woman leader, the first feminist woman leader who's really going to actually lead a transformation at the United Nations to many of the things that we've been discussing. Now, when you read the academic literature on this, it's interesting. There is this crucial sort of idea of like this descriptive representation that we've discussed. The importance of the symbolic importance of having someone at the top of the UN that women and girls can actually, they can feel inspired by. They can feel confident in following a path towards such a high office. But there's also the substantive issue, and there's been a lot of studies about what changes when women lead, and there's some very, very hard empirical evidence that things like staff composition, wages, performance, a more equitable sort of management environment, enhancing overall efficiency. There's a whole slew of very, very sort of empirically evidenced changes that you might expect to see at an organization. So there's also the sort of work that women have done in peace building. Shout out to many of our really amazing partner organizations and supporter NGOs that we're working with, including the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. If you look at their research, you look at the way that women do mediation and the sort of talents that they can bring to such roles, and you see that peace is more sustainable and peace lasts longer. And so there's lots of well-evidenced ways that such a sort of feminist and a feminist approach at the UN could actually substantively change things, as well as just that symbolic sort of representation. I do want to warn about one thing. We talk about glass ceilings quite often. There's this concept of the glass cliff as well. When men have failed, so often that women are put in a very precarious situation and set up with a very, very hard task to actually perform well at. And you can see many of the hallmarks of such an almost impossible situation coming together right now with the sort of the attacks that the UN is under from some of its biggest supporters, including the United Nations, from some of its biggest traditional supporters. So I do want to sort of warn of the idea of the UN Secretary General, for the first time in 80 years, we have a woman Secretary General, but then actually they have such an impossible task that they can there's no possibility for them to actually do well at it. So I do want to sort of just raise that spectre of the glass cliff. We shouldn't over increase our expectations too much, because there's only so much that can be done. There's also this idea of glass walls, of women being trapped within certain sort of certain parts of the UN system. Therefore, the peace, the peace building roles and peacekeeping and the sort of more hard security type roles are often captured by men. And so, we could get the change at the very top, but actually there could be other parts of the UN system that remain monopolized in other ways. But, I think that you're talking about the sort of longer term sort of approach. And what this campaign, what could change if everything goes, let's just say, if we could just magic our entire sort of policy platform into reality overnight, and what might change in the future. Well, I think it will be another part of the jigsaw puzzle of sharing power more evenly around the world. And so I think it will be another part of that puzzle of the General Assembly becoming more assertive, reclaiming power from the Security Council and changing that sort of dynamic. But far more sort of maybe far more sort of importantly, I think it will provide the world with a Secretary General who speaks beyond government, who speaks to the global public, and actually it comes closer to what many of those who wrote the UN Charter envisage, which is the UN Secretary General being accountable not to the governments of the world's countries, but to the peoples of the world's countries, and actually that being the place from which she derives her power from, not just from sort of doing the bidding of the world's most powerful countries, but doing the bidding and working with all the countries in the General Assembly and the global civil society, the global public, because after all, that's the sort of that's where the groundswell could come from, and that's where the legitimacy and the mandate to act, the mandate to lead, will really come from, and that's the kind of untapped resource that will require a very, very special leader to be able to tap into. But this is you've got to aim high. This is our hope. We're an ambitious campaign. We've got hundreds of NGO supporters, but not nearly enough, and we're very much in outreach mode right now. I'm not sure if we'll have the chance to discuss, how we can get involved with the campaign, but
Sure.
this is, come to the website and check it out. And that is our vision for reimagining power, I suppose, through this campaign. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ben. I am enjoying your metaverse where you've put me, and I'm imagining how the world would be, right? If everybody, in the words of famous African writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, if everybody could just be feminists, we should all be. It's not a threat to any man. It's not. We can all share power if we reimagine it and actually bring it to fruition in this manner in which you've explained. Ben and Issei, I know that there is someone out there listening to you who is wondering how they can be part of this dream, how they can be part of realizing all these amazing things that you explained to us today. How exactly can anyone who wants to support the movement?
Thank you. I mean, I think that they can start by being feminists and embracing this direction and this vision that Ben so eloquently and you so eloquently outlined. I think there's some really practical things. Go to 1for8billion.org, find out more, read our policy platform and sign up, join our mailing lists. If you work for an organization, become a partner of the campaign. If you work in thematic areas that you want to shape the vision of the next Secretary General, come and tell us your ideas. Be part of this process where we want to amplify voices. We want to create networks globally that make sure that kind of those who are doing the work on the ground, those who are already creating alternative futures, who are working to change the status quo, join us and make sure, and we'll make sure that your voice is heard. And yeah, thank you so much. And the work that Forest is doing and what you're spotlighting in this way is really incredible. And we're just very delighted to join you. I think that we love to walk the talk, as it were. We are all about collaboration, shared knowledge, and we're always learning. So please come and tell us your ideas. And we can't wait for you to join us. And also fund us, please. If you are a funder out there, give us your money, please. We need it. Thank you.
Yes, we always need money. Please, we encourage you to visit their website and find out just how you can create an impact, help them push their ideas forward so that we can finally all move in the right direction, in the direction of equality, true equality, not just on paper. Ben and Issei, thank you so much for honoring our invitation. It was such a pleasure exchanging with you today. I almost wish it did not have to end.
Thank you so much. Great to speak.
Thank you.
And to you, thank you so much once again. And to you out there, we should all be feminists. Think about it for a second. It is not a threat in any way to you. If you believe this, if you want to be a part of this, please visit the 1for8 billion campaign page and then find out how you can get involved. And once again, thank you for tuning in to this episode of A Space for Us. And as we continue our March With Us campaign, we invite you to explore the story of all the amazing people we have interviewed before. We'll be interviewing in the upcoming episodes to reimagine power and also remember to empower a woman near you.
A space for us.
Un espacio para nosotras.
Un espace pour nous.